Hello, seniors, and welcome to Financial Aid 101. In this presentation, we'll be covering the different forms of financial aid for your post-secondary careers. As you can see from the image above, there is a number of different costs when taking into account the day-to-day while you're on campus and in college in general. So it's not just the cost of tuition, and we'll be talking about the different ways that students can cover that cost. So what is financial aid? Financial aid is any money that you are offered that will help you pay for the college expenses. A lot of times students don't look at loans as financial aid, but at the end of the day they are. And this is money that can be applied to any of the career schools, four-year colleges, technical colleges, as well as community colleges. And they can come from pretty much anywhere. They can come from the federal or state. They can come from colleges themselves, high schools, as well as foundations and corporations. When we're going over the different ways you can find scholarships, corporations are going to be a huge source of where scholarships can come from. Some of you may have started receiving financial aid award letters from your schools. You may be waiting on them, or you haven't started the process. Wherever you are in this process, we want to make sure that when you get those letters, you know how to read them. In this example, you will find this student's cost of attendance includes the cost of tuition, fees, and living expenses. Some students will not be required to live on campus or purchase a meal plan, so if you're not sure, it's going to be important to ask. Then you'll see that this student received grants and scholarships, and they have a balance of $5,100. In this overall pricing, there are going to be some direct costs as well as indirect costs. The direct costs are going to include things like the tuition and board or the mandatory fees. And the indirect costs are going to include textbooks, supplies, and personal expenses. And while a lot of financial aid award letters will give you a guesstimate of how much it's going to cost you, it's really going to depend on where you shop, where you purchase your books, potentially your major, and other factors. Now, in this example, this student does have a balance of $5,100, but there are times where a student can have a negative balance, which means that they would be entitled to a refund. So if we take an example of a college that costs $25,000 with housing, maybe they receive the HOPE of $7,000 and then the Pell Grant of $6,000, that student would have an out-of-pocket balance of $12,000. But if that same student applied for, let's say, 10 scholarships, they were $5,000 each, and they were awarded, let's say, maybe 2 or 3, that student has the potential to lower that balance to $2,000, or they could be receiving money back in the amount of $3,000. So in the previous example, I mentioned some of this free money that can be applied to the cost of attending college that lowers that overall net price. So when people call it free money, they call it free money because you don't have to pay it back. But in reality, nothing is truly free. So you've worked for it in some way. So maybe you have athletic skill and so you get a scholarship for that. Or you're getting a scholarship because of your test scores and GPA. Or you wrote an amazing essay and you applied for a scholarship, so you put in the time and the work there, and that's where you're getting this money. But at the end of the day, it's money that you are getting that you do not have to pay back. So typically grants are awarded through the state and federal government, and so you'll get awards that way. So some examples would be the Hope and Zell Miller. Those are state scholarships, and they're based on merit. You can get a scholarship for community service or your family income, and that would be considered need-based. And with need-based scholarships, it's going to depend on your family size and overall income. Now with work study, again, this is money that you get and that you are awarded, but with work study, you don't get it until you've actually put in the hours at work. And so you can't collect until you've earned it, which is through work. Now, some people might be thinking, well, work study is just another job. Why wouldn't I just get another job on my own? Well, with work study, they have certain guidelines that the schools have to abide by because you're a student, and so they oftentimes are more flexible. They'll pay you a little bit more, so you don't have to work as much, and you really do get to focus on your studies while you're in school because that's the priority, and a campus job understands that. So work study is a great way to earn some cash if you are looking for a job, and so just keeping that in mind, but it does have to be requested through the FAFSA, and once it's requested, if it's awarded, you will earn it after you have put in those hours. As I mentioned before, there are a lot of different scholarship types, one of them being the merit-based scholarship. So this may require an application. For example, the Hope and Zell Miller, you qualify for it, you apply, you get it. With the other ones, in terms of being automatically awarded, this is oftentimes referring to the schools. So if you meet a certain GPA and test scores, then they'll automatically award it to you. It does not mean that you're guaranteed the scholarship because you meet those requirements. So just keeping that in mind, it is often rewarded. They may call it a scholarship, a waiver, depending on if you're in state or out of state, but just know that those are scholarships. The need-based scholarships, you can read more about these, but they are through the FAFSA, and the links will be at the end, but it is going to be based on family size and income. There are also internal scholarships, which again, if you have picked a school, you know that's where you're going, apply to every scholarship available at that school. They can be given through different departments. They can be given through the different colleges or different clubs and organizations. So be on the lookout for those, and definitely visiting the Scholarship Resource Center at that school. Also know that there are external scholarships, so different foundations and organizations that have scholarships. If you're awarded them, then they will give it to your school. And that can include the Atlanta Hawks Foundation as well as Cobb Educational Foundation that awards students these scholarships. Scholarships are everywhere. When you're thinking about these 3 scholarships, there are a couple points that you should walk away with. When it comes to the state scholarships, keep in mind those are only open to residents. They're not transferable out of state, which means if you're awarded the Hope or Zell Miller and decide to go to a school in New York, that scholarship cannot go with you. Just like a student from New York wanting to come to a school in Georgia, they would not qualify for the Hope and Zell Miller scholarship. With the university scholarships, those are not transferable to other schools. So if a department at a specific school awards you a scholarship, you cannot take that scholarship with you, even though it might be underneath your major or something like that. It has to stay with that school. So those cannot go across. Third-party scholarships, those can come from community organizations, nonprofit, corporate. Those are transferable unless it's noted on the application. For example, students that are awarded the Posse Scholarship, they have to take that scholarship to specific schools that they would go to. They can't just take it anywhere that they would like. And just keep in mind that third-party scholarships also include churches, banks, chain restaurants, and things like that. When it comes to the Hope and Zell Miller Scholarship, it's going to be important for students to know the requirements as well as the courses they've taken and whether or not they meet the Hope and Zell Miller rigor requirement. The link for the list of classes will be at the end of this presentation, and you'll see a couple of the requirements here. Zell Miller obviously has a higher GPA, and they require the SAT or ACT scores, and students are encouraged to fill out the FAFSA for both. With the Hope GPA, if students are curious what that is, they can go onto Georgia Futures and click on the My Hope GPA, and it will show you what your core class GPA is. So now on to the topic of loans. As you can see here, I'll be covering 3 today, but the most important thing to know is any loan you take out must be paid back, and it's typically going to be paid back with interest. For the subsidized loans, this typically is better for students, but there are lower loan limits. But basically what happens is a student will take out a loan, let's say day 1, and interest that is building on that will be paid by the education department, and a student will not have to start paying back the loan itself until 6 months after they've stopped going to school. Now, the unsubsidized loans also has that 6-month rule for students, but what happens with this loan is as soon as the student takes out that loan, interest begins to build, and that student is responsible for the interest that is building on that loan while they are in school. For the Parent Plus loan, students that are going to school can have their parents take out this loan, and there are flexible loan limits, but the parent cannot have bad credit. If they have bad credit, they won't be able to take out that loan, and it would be going directly to a parent versus a student. Now, there are also private loans that are available, but they have different terms and conditions. And so basically, if you sign a contract with a private loan, they can put any terms and conditions they want on it. And if you take out that loan, then you have to abide by that. There's not much consideration to whether or not you're a student. Now, taking out a loan is not a bad thing. Taking out loans irresponsibly is. When you think about getting older and the things that you will have to take out, for example, a house, a car. Everyone takes out a loan at some point, but taking out more money than you can manage is where things often go wrong. Again, some private loans have their own terms and conditions, so they may require a credit check, they'll have higher interest rates, they may require you to make ongoing payments while you're in school, and so these are all things to take in consideration when you're thinking about taking out a loan. Let's take a couple moments to talk about the FAFSA. Even if the plan is for your parents to be paying for your education, it is still strongly recommended that you complete the FAFSA. You never know how much money you're going to be awarded from these colleges and universities, and you don't want to miss out on any funds that they'll potentially award you based on the FAFSA information they receive. As you can see, the FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, and it's available through FAFSA.gov. Be sure not to use any other websites because they may charge you and not send your information to the colleges or universities you list. So just bypass all the trouble and go directly to FAFSA.gov. As I said before, colleges use the FAFSA in a lot of different ways when they're awarding packages, so you want to be sure you don't miss out on any money there. Some students really believe that they do not qualify for aid through the FAFSA, so they don't want to waste their time in completing one. If you have all of your information that you need, it'll take about 30 minutes. So definitely put in that time to see if you can get extra money. Any money that is awarded can be accepted or declined before the beginning of the school year. And lastly, you want to make sure as seniors going in for the fall of 2020, you'll want to make sure you're completing the 2020 to 2021 FAFSA. If you complete the 2019 to 2020 FAFSA, you will only have aid for the summer of this year. So in preparing to complete the FAFSA, you're going to want to make sure you have all the items listed here ready, so then that way you can get through the FAFSA as quickly as possible, but you want to make sure that the information is accurate. So definitely make sure you double check everything before you submit. You can always go back and correct information, but it may extend processing time in terms of when it gets to the colleges. And a lot of times information will need to be verified, so you don't want to delay your application. In completing the FAFSA, students often have questions regarding their dependency status, and to help clarify that, there are a list of questions available on the FAFSA website where students can go and see if any of the questions apply to them. If they answer yes, then they may not need to provide their parent information. This link will also be at the end of the presentation for students. So I do want to switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the funding opportunities available for students interested in technical schools. There is a HOPE grant, which has no minimum GPA, but there are certain checkpoints during your post-secondary career where you will have to have a minimum of a 2.0 GPA. There's also the Strategic Industries Workforce Development Grant, which provides full tuition to students enrolled in one of the 12 programs of study. And those 12 programs will be shown on the next slide. Students must also be eligible for receiving the Hope Roselle Miller Grant. Here are the 12 technical school programs. If any of these areas sound interesting to you, be sure to look into them through the Technical College System of Georgia. Let's talk more about specifics. So you have all this information about scholarships, but where do you apply? Where should you start? Definitely start by following the Centennial High School Counseling Twitter and Instagram page. Go ahead and complete your FAFSA and follow up with colleges and universities to see what other money is available. The scholarship and education websites are definitely going to be a great tool. Chegg actually has a couple of scholarships, one where you can respond in 2 minutes or you can write 3 sentences and then you have a shot at a scholarship. So check those out for sure. A couple of other large and small businesses you can look into: Google, Microsoft, State Farm, Dell. In terms of the law firms, a lot of times they have essays surrounding your commitment to justice. So if you're thinking about going into law, definitely checking those out. And then some other ones: Chick-fil-A, Dunkin' Donuts, Burger King, Coca-Cola. They all have scholarships available for students. So look everywhere you can for them if money's a concern. And here are 10 scholarship tips. So be sure to identify your strengths. You want it to come through naturally in your essay. You don't want it to feel forced. Prioritize to find the right scholarship. So consider the time, the difficulty of the application or essay, and your return on investment. How much money are you getting out of it? How many students is it actually awarded to? How many years are you going to have it for? Is it renewable? What conditions are required? For example, do you have to maintain a certain GPA? These are all things you want to be thinking about when you start putting your college scholarship list together. Definitely start early. It's just the beginning of the year, so there are still tons of scholarships out there, but you want to be sure to give yourself time to put that, if it requires an essay, put that essay away for a day or two and then circle back with fresh thoughts when you're evaluating it. Work with other scholarship seekers. You know, teamwork makes the dream work, so definitely having people that are going to be doing it with you is going to help. Focus on the sponsor's goal. A lot of times it's maybe major or field specific scholarships, so know what the company's values are. A lot of times you'll find this in the About Us section of the websites. Follow the instructions. If it has a specific word limit or topic, make sure you stick by that. Scholarships often have to eliminate people because they get so many, so you don't want to fall into that pile. And don't be afraid to call and ask them. If you're worried about the number count and you want to know whether or not it's an exact number, just feel free to give them a call. Stand out, engage the essay, be formal. You don't want to use slang, eliminate apostrophes if you can, and I definitely always encourage students, use Grammarly. It is free. It is the way to go. It'll help you check and double check the spelling and punctuation, and you can submit all your information worry-free. So be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram for those scholarship postings as they come across our office. As promised, here are all of the presentation links that were mentioned throughout the presentation. You can take any one of these links exactly as they are and just put them in your search bar and the information will pop up for you. If you have general questions, be sure to reach out to your high school counselor. If your questions are more specific to your financial aid award letter or financial aid for a specific college or university, you're going to want to make sure you reach out to that university specifically for more support.